Hello and welcome to another episode 302 of the Thursday Night Podcast. My name is Brady, joined by David. Last week, I don't want to say we were piping a bunch of just like hot air and like hype, but we were pointing to maybe the reasons why as we're approaching Del McGee's third season at Georgia State, 4-20 in the first two seasons, why if the season goes well, there is reason for optimism on the offensive side, is that being the reason why. Keeping up with the format, we are switching to the defense this week, and just to put it plainly, there's less reason to do that. We have not seen a good Georgia State defense, or even an average Georgia State defense, or even a respectively below average defense under Del McGee. It's just that unit has been a sore spot both of the last two seasons, and so we will not have the same kind of vigor with this is the path we see to it. We're really all going to have to do it together where it's like, oh, they're putting it together. These units are playing together, and it's finally happening. This isn't going to be a podcast where we're really going to leave you with like the message of like, and this is why the defense will be good. I mean, speaking just for myself at least.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. And I guess the silver lining, if you were to put this into the content vault and we look back in, a couple months and Georgia State is the Sun Belt East champs and they, have a triumphant victory to the Sun Belt championship game, part of where the success would come from is also a double-edged sword, because if you're looking at the starting 11 from the last game last year, there is one player, one starter who is returning from what if a projected 2026 depth chart is. Just one player. And it's an important position, mind you, but like the ways that they can be a defense that is good, really good, is it's just new. It's a completely new team. Some of the guys were on the team last year. They just weren't starters, or they were hurt, but that's going to be where it is. There's a bunch of transfers, and there's a bunch of guys who, were not even in the two deep last year. They were actually third, and just due to the people who transferred out of Georgia State, they got starting jobs now.
Well, and some of them were playing last year in some smaller roles you're expecting more from, that you're just hoping to see growth from over the course of the offseason, which at the end of the day is what football is a lot of time. Especially what it used to be, not to do the soapbox, like get off my yawn, old people, get off my lawn. This is like guys get better year to year, and that's especially the case. Like young guys take a leap into year two, and the defense is definitely banking on some of that. You mentioned some of the new. Obviously, that also extends to you've got a pair of co-defensive coordinators that are now going to run the ship there. Travis Pearson moves on after last season, which kind of the only path that had to be taken there. Just the defense was even worse than year one under Kevin Shearer, which
38
doing because
38 points a game,
37 points a game, 37 between 37, 38. So I think, and here's what I'll say: I think big picture, the issue is we're now technically on the fourth defensive coordinator because Darren Wilson accepts the job last spring, ended up not staying, so Pearson comes on late. It's been four pretty different, or at least three that we can point to, different visions for what defensive philosophy you're going to see. And it just speaks to, if Del McGee has had from day one in this job an idea of what he wants the defense to, like, this is what we're known for, this is what we do, it hasn't shown on the field. It hasn't shown in the hiring decisions. So I think that's been the biggest issue as we talk about maybe why Georgia State hasn't had a good defense under Del McGee. I just don't really know what they're out there trying to do other than just the generic, like, stop the other team from scoring points, which hasn't been all that successful as they've tried it. But in hiring Cam Clark and John Hanline, Hanline was at Youngstown State as the DC. He accepted the job on a call from Austria. He told us when he met with the media at the beginning of camp that he was in Austria on a vacation and was back and forth like, all right, this job sounds interesting. And that's when he first spoke to Del McGee for the first time in, I guess, the Alps somewhere in the mountains in Austria. So setting the new record for the furthest someone has accepted a Georgia State position on the coaching staff.
We have to do a podcast now with one of us in Austria.
Yeah, how many different times are we gonna have to restart that up? The connection went away. I'm expecting the connection on that call itself was also not great. just the cell service probably not great in wherever in Austria it was. But he comes in. Interesting to me, he comes in and takes a non-play calling defensive coordinator role after being the DC at Youngstown the last couple of seasons. Was the linebackers coach as well. Speaks to, I think, that it matters to get to this level, and probably hoping even if this season doesn't go well that he can use this to get onto another FBS staff somewhere. And so certainly speaks to something of the gap that is growing between teams that are at the FBS level and FCS, no matter how good their records are. Just like there is just a meaningful difference perception-wise nowadays, which there always was, but I think is getting greater even between the FCS and the G5, G6. Cam Clark is the play-calling DC. He and Dell worked together on the Auburn staff back in 2013, so that's the connection there. And him and Coach Handline have worked together at Western Illinois. He and Troy Douglas, who is the cornerbacks coach, worked together at Lamar. And he had a quote about this when he spoke to the media. It's 3 people who have had play calling experience on the defense. He said, "We've got 3 defensive coordinators, former defensive coordinators in the room. We all ran the same system, so I think that's great. I don't think I've got all the answers. I want to surround myself with people who I think are smarter than me and can help me do it." First of all, great, just coach quote, selfless, like put everyone before myself, like all the rest of it. But also, I think it is the cohesive kind of picture of a defensive staff that hasn't been there the last couple of years. They've had a lot of young guys on staff who didn't necessarily know each other. I didn't feel like the defensive coordinator had as much say in how the staff got put together as it is apparent that Clark has had to say in. And if they did, they didn't do a good job of acting on that and putting together a staff that really made sense together. And so all of this to say is a long-winded way of getting to the point of, I actually think this is the way that if you were going to do it, makes the most sense. But it is a pair of play callers who haven't done it at this level with a lot of new players. And it hasn't worked the last couple of years as it is with McGee at the center kind of putting the vision together. So I think this is how you would draw it up if you were going to pick it in year 3 when you knew that you're probably not getting the first 5 guys on your list. But it's still uphill sledding, and it's still going to be basically just a whole new defense all over again, redux.
And that's, as I said in the beginning, it's either going to be a problem as we expect it to, or it's going to be the sad part is they don't even have that much to do to be better than last year. I just looked it up. Georgia State has had one year where they've allowed fewer than 30 points a game in the last 5 seasons. And the last time was in 2021. And they've had good seasons in that stretch.
No points for guessing which year they won 8 games. It was 2021.
Exactly.
They allowed less than 30 points a game. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and if we go all the way back, they haven't. That has been the issue, even in the years where the team has been good, is they, outside of 2016, 2017, one of which is the year they only won 3 games because the offense was just, so in 2016 the offense was so below par that the defense being, frankly, good to great to elite didn't matter. Other than those couple of years, they haven't had a above par defense. Right now, you would take just somewhere in the, like you said last time, with the offense. Like, you're not asking them to improve from 137th to 37th, but you need to be somewhere in the 100 to 75 range if you're trying to have like maximal goals. But really, you got to get out of the bottom level when talking about the major statistics. In the bottom 5 in scoring defense, in the bottom 10 in rushing defense. Like, you've got to raise it to, it is not one of the worst units statistically in the sport, and then go from there. And so I see the vision this time. I think I've said it on a few of these pods. Like, I see what they've tried to do, and I see that they have made different choices than they have in putting the staff together and putting the defensive roster together. To think that, maybe it's going to be better, but it's still maybe at this point. You have to see it in practice. And the job, I guess most of the job as far as install is basically done because schools started. They're getting into game week next week against North Carolina A&T, but you hope at this point that they've used the last month wisely and used the spring and summer wisely, because it's going to be a lot on their shoulders to get through this schedule, get to whatever that acceptable level might be. And then at the end of the year, we're talking about a legitimately good defense. We will both say we didn't really see that coming because there was no way to project it. Like, we aren't going to pretend to have been front runners on this. We need to see it too.
It would be incredibly hard for, I think in the starting 11 that I just kind of scribbled down here, they've got, 5 transfers? It would be incredibly hard for that defense to just plug and play and be an elite defense. Like, that doesn't even consistently happen at the power 4 level. How many times have we, been watching a broadcast and heard commentators talk about, this team, the defense is supposed to be good, but they've got all these transfers and they're not really gelling. Like, that happens a lot, and it's not like they're not returning good players, I think that there's at least some talent, but it's like, how is that talent going to coalesce? Because coming into last year, we thought that last year, the defensive line, I distinctly remember coming into the season, you and I thought the defensive line, specifically the nose and a couple of the edges, were going to lead the way for Georgia State. And it was like one of the worst sacking teams I think that we've seen out of Georgia State in a long time, and it's some of that is injuries. It's not just like, okay, these two guys underperformed. No, I'm not crazy.
But if you want to, not just sacks, but tackles for loss, 2024, McGee's first season, they were dead last in the conference, 46 TFLs. 2025, second to last by a single TFL with 57 as a unit. You're talking at the top of the league. Texas State has 96, but even just middle of the pack. The teams in App State in 8th place in the conference the last year in TFLs had 77. That's 20 more than Georgia State had. And that's, a handful more a game, but it adds up, and every single one adds up. And the TFL yardage as well. They're 57 for 175. They're the only team in TFL yardages that were not 200 or greater in the league. And that's the talking about, you're not having those plays that turns a 1st and 10 into a 2nd and 15 and basically kills a drive. Had some of those happen against you, and certainly penalties contributed. We haven't mentioned penalties yet in this general. Obviously, that was a big issue for the offense as well. If this is still the most penalized team in the country, then this is obviously still going to be a problem, and that's going to be a big detractor for them. But the TFLs that, the game-changing plays, the big sack, the big loss on a running play where you immediately suss it out and get it behind the line of scrimmage, a lot of that's been missing. And like you say, I think even leading up into the game and even stuff we saw early on, it was like maybe the trends are there for when they aren't playing Ole Miss for the unit to come together, and it never happened. And so I think you're right to start there. We'll confirm maybe something I've said on the pod, that it looked in the spring game like they were running a 4-2-5, maybe some 3-3-5. And from Cam Clark himself, the quote was, "We're going to be a multiple defense," which every defensive coordinator says. But he did go on to elaborate. He said,
"We're not sitting 60 minutes in base? Oh, wow, what a surprise."
Well, multiple, fast, physical, all the rest of it. But he said the base will be a 4-2-5, but you'll see us line up in every structure that you can imagine. Our philosophy is to be simple. We carry a lot of looks. We run kind of the same things over and over, but we do it out of multiple looks. We stay very simple for the players. We're always simple. We can play fast. So that's the philosophy. And that kind of goes into, the first year they brought in Kevin Shearer's DC, and it was like, he's an NFL coach. He's doing this NFL defense. It's NFL terminology and all the rest of it. And it seems from that point on, it's been a trend down towards simplifying it as much as possible. And I think that does track. It makes sense. And the governing philosophy is that you can still maybe confuse opponents if you were throwing them at a different looks. I guess time will tell over the course of a season, and 8 different Sun Belt coordinators getting to do film study, how much that plays out week to week. But I certainly get the idea of do fewer things for the players to have to recognize and have the personnel be different, and that be the differentiator. I think that makes sense. We'll see. Time will tell. But that's kind of the word from Clark himself, and confirming I can pass the test of identifying formation personnel groups from the stands at his spring game. That basically is what it looked like, and it seems like that's what they will operate out of a lot, which it reduces 4-2-5 means 2 linebackers, and so personnel is going to be funky, and you might have like outside linebackers working in the defensive line numbers as well as maybe one of the 4s in a 4-2-5, or if it's a 3-3-5, obviously you'd be taking that might be one of the outside linebackers there, but it does change the numbers around as far as who we're expecting to contribute from each unit, because there's going to be less linebackers on the field necessarily on a given play, or out of base, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm jealous of you just because there's no all 22 for college that I can that I know of anyway. That'd be honestly insane. We don't need that.
Yeah, I mean, the all 22 for college is just like what every program does, filming their own games from up high, and obviously that not available to the public for certain obvious reasons.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the defense, like you said, last year, I still think it was. I don't know how much of it really was like the guys weren't good enough versus the scheme not being good enough and not taking advantage of it. But you have Bishop Thomas, who is now a rotational piece for the Oklahoma D-line. Had a really good season last year, certainly earned a level up to the SEC. Deuce Lewis is gone. Marlon Dean, the edges, departed. Actually, he's gone to UAB, I guess. Henry Bryant graduates. Dartavius Flournoy, the freshman, goes to Syracuse. Few other guys transfer out. Those are kind of the big hitters as far as who you've lost. You bring in the likes of Kelsey Howard from Oregon State, A.J. Vaughns from Dodge City Community College, Manju Berthe from Wingate. This is a unit that's been pretty well made over. You've got some guys, like another group that you mentioned there, that you had some guys that have maybe worked through lower in the rotation who might play bigger roles this year. And Jabril Rhodes-Nelson comes back for another season. He had previously entered the portal. Keelan Butler, the sophomore outside linebacker, he's the guy maybe I'd mentioned earlier who didn't play as much last year, but got snaps, got his feet wet, and I kind of think could be a bigger factor, especially as maybe one of those tweeners when you're talking about the 4-2-5 versus the 3-3-5, a guy that maybe can find himself on the field in a couple of different spots there. And the general thing there with the defensive line is just someone emerging as a difference maker, a guy that demands multiple blockers to come his way, that you got to circle on the scouting report, because that is how I think you unlock this group, providing you more in the flashy, the TFLs, the sacks, the big plays. And I think that is going to be where it starts and finishes with whether this defense can be as effective as it needs to be this year. Is if they're stopping the run, if they're getting some sacks and TFLs stacked up that they haven't been able to do the first 2 seasons in Del McGee's tenure.
Yeah, and it sucks because like part of why this is such a pessimistic quote unquote podcast is like that's such a big ask for a defense that has not been able to do that for a couple of years. That's what makes this so difficult to try to, figure out, because you could see, Butler come out and have a good year at that outside linebacker position. You could see Rhodes-Nelson come back and have another good year on the D line. Those are the types of positions that I think those are the positions that last year just really did not give Georgia State enough. And, you mentioned something earlier, and to bring it to the NFL, I know I'm always doing this, so sorry if it's annoying. One of the things that I like about watching the Houston Texans play defense is they don't do anything crazy. It's literally just, hey, here's my 11. You know what I'm running. I know you know what I'm running because I don't really deviate from what I'm running, but I run it all the time because it works. You have to be the one to try to stop it because we're so good. I'm not saying Georgia State needs to be like that, but I think over the years we've been expecting, some exotic blitzes, some, they used to blitz with their safeties a lot more than I think they did last year.
It's what killed them last year. They were doing too much. They were big coverage busts early in the season. They just stopped doing it, and then at that point, when that was supposed to be kind of a big part of what they did, when they stopped doing it because they couldn't, because they kept giving up huge plays, it's kind of like, all right, what is this defense trying to do? And you can't really figure that out on the fly. It stopped being clear where they were going to attack opposing offenses. And that's also why I think the switch in coordinator philosophy makes a ton of sense, because it's kind of doing the reverse of what you did last year, where there was a lot more in the leaning of exotic, and now keeping it simple. should make it easier for your guys. And at least if you're doing something well, and if the old adage everyone says, forget, maybe it was like Gavin Pringle when he was here, someone gave this quote when they were talking to media of like, if all 11 guys are on the right play, they're all right. Yeah, it's like the first step is being all in the same thing. If one guy is in the wrong play because you're doing something that not everyone's on the same page, it's too complicated, and one guy's in the wrong coverage, that can lead to a big bust. So that's maybe more the secondary than the D-line, but just as a point of where things have gone wrong for Georgia State in the past, I think there's something to it. Like, obviously, there's a reason why NFL players and good NFL defenses are able to do it that way. Is just they've got tremendous, talented guys who are good at their jobs, and you can't just look at it in the NFL lens in that way when you're looking at a Georgia State team that's was 137th or whatever in scoring defense last year. But I think it's a swing that makes a lot of sense. And Rhodes Nelson, you mentioned, his better games are towards the end of last year. He started to find his rhythm. He's a guy who came up from D2 Millersville. Kind of makes sense that he wouldn't be immediately up to speed right away. But he got there by the end of the season. Well, the defense never really got it going. By the end of the year, he was starting to have his production ramp up. He's one of the representatives that Del McGee took with him to New Orleans, which is always certainly an indicator. The other one being Cameron Brown, who, if you listen to last week's episode, we certainly expect a lot from on the offensive side. So that is certainly a big clue to me as to they think he can be a big player for this team in 2026. It's just hard at this point to know exactly who will emerge, other than maybe you're looking at a Butler, a guy who's a sophomore you bring up, who you're hoping for, kind of what we were talking about with the receiving core last week. You're just banking on the recruiting class you've been putting together at high school to start bearing fruit. Guy like Rhodes Nelson, you saw some on the field towards the end of the year. Xavier Esquillian, who I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, I'm sorry, who's the Savannah State transfer, put up double-digit sack numbers there at the D2 level, so he's another guy that I'd circle of maybe possibly helping you out there. But the other guys were productive players at another level, lower level, and I think that's a good way to go, but you just don't know. And you don't know who's going to emerge. And D-line is a funky thing where it's rotation. You want to keep guys fresh all the time, so it's not even like you need one of these guys necessarily, especially on the interior where it's a lot of dirty work, to be 15 TFL guy or whatever it is. But you need the floor to be raised across the board, and then whether it's one of the edge guys, whether it's one of the linebackers, I don't know, whoever wants to step up. Like, they do need at least one guy, one player who you're talking about double-digit TFLs and is got to be accounted for on the scouting report.
Yeah, somebody's got to eat twice a game, for the entire season at a minimum. Maybe just one person, but you need two people who can consistently get you a bucket.
So it'll be curious to see how that shakes out. And it's more the same with the linebacking core, which, as I mentioned, you might be seeing less of them on a play-by-play basis because only two in the base 4-2-5, but maybe that offers a chance for different guys to play different roles. Maybe you've got roles for guys playing multiple spots, or I don't exactly know how it's going to shake out. I don't know if it's going to be like settling on 2 or 3 guys you move around just formationally in that group. But Josiah Robinson, who really was just a tenured professor at this point at Georgia State. He's been on the defense for a few years. He comes over with Chad Staggs when he takes over the defense from Coastal Carolina ahead of 2023, and he stays over, is involved in the first 2 years of Del McGee. First of all, just be weird seeing him not on the field just because he's been pretty ever-present there in the middle. But he is out of eligibility. Kendrick Walker goes to Baylor. Demaine Wilson goes to Cincinnati. So Kobe Owens, who they bring in from JUCO last year, is the only player, I think, with any registered statistics who played linebacker for Georgia State this year, returning. So you have Jaden Hood come in from Michigan. You bring in Ryan Green, who's a teammate of Berthay at Wingate, productive player there at the lower level. Chandler Covington, also in the mix there, linebacker. Some freshmen as well who haven't played and just wait to see. And then Eric Butler as well from the Hutchinson Community College. Got a lot of options, and maybe the eye candy of the guy who's from Michigan and Jaden Hood stands out as a possible guy you'd think recruiting pedigrees there as a former 4-star guy. Another group, I don't know who will emerge, but maybe this is you're looking for a spot for someone to, like, that is still in the mix for these are the guys who will be your big sack or TFL numbers, depending on how they're used. Still looking from the front 7 from that impact. And so even as you were losing a ton of snaps and ton of 150 combined tackles between Robinson and Walker last year, linebackers always find a way of being in the mix. So I don't know, like, someone will make up that production. It's just about whether it's those impact productive plays.
Yeah, I mean, well said. The rotation will be good for the linebackers because, I mean, we just have not seen crazy great linebacker play at Georgia State in a couple of years. And I mean, there was a nice little run there, with back when Blake Harrell was still on the team.
Him and Jordan Venzial,
tandem. It was such a good tandem, and since then, they've had like a couple of guys who've been able to play a little bit, but not 2 guys who you can just say, yes, Georgia State has anchors in the middle of the field.
And then this is just one stat I wanted to throw in. I meant to throw in last week, I forgot, but now I can work it in because it works for both the rushing offense and the rushing defense. The rushing defense gave up 75 10-plus rushing attempts last year, and then 19 20-plus, which that honestly not great. Yeah, that's more than 1 a game, but the 75, when you contrast that to the offense itself only had 42 10-plus rushing yards and then 10 of 20 or more. So we spoke last week about the ineffectiveness of the rushing offense to get going, and we've spoken, give them 207, 208 rushing yards a game as a defense. Certainly that's the one area that's got to stop is you need some more of the TFLs, but you also just need 5-yard runs when it's they beat you at the line of scrimmage and not 10-yarders or more. And that was certainly there more than an abundance of those in 2025 at Georgia State's defense. I say switching pages to the secondary as we move on, but it's honestly more of the same in that we're about to list off a bunch of players who no longer play for Georgia State. Jalen Jones, the second, goes to Virginia. D.I.C. Hopkins is Liberty. Deuce Fillmore, after 1 season coming from JUCO, is now at Illinois. Jordan Huff, out of eligibility, who came in from ECU at safety. Bernard Kazi is at Wake Forest. Shams John is at West Virginia, and I actually saw you got a question about facing Ted Hurst in practice, and along with the lines of a West Virginia receiver he is facing daily in practice nowadays. That saw that making the social rounds today. It was funny. Tyler Scott, he of the incident in Oxford against Ole Miss in Week 1 pregame, is at Arkansas. So funny enough, I will reunite with Ole Miss, I believe, this year. I don't know the SEC schedule at the top of my head, but that is the storylines never die ever. You did get Deuce Walker back, kind of along the lines with Jabril Rhodes-Nelson. You have a guy who goes into the portal that you think is probably leaving, and then he comes back. So you have 2 of those cases. And as this is now going to be 4-2-5, maybe more DBs on the field, a guy like Deuce Walker who has played both cornerback and safety, that feels like a valuable, versatile weapon for you as a defensive coordinator when you Cam Clark. You have Derek Maxey coming back, and Tyson McCurry showed some flashes. At times was like the best corner on the field as a freshman walk-on, I believe. So he's back. You have to note him on that list because he 3 PBUs, 233 snaps. He also made some plays on special teams.
Yeah, I was going to say he was
way to get noticed.
Really good on special teams in the middle there, and then he started starting and had a couple of bad plays, but I believe he redeemed himself in the Old Dominion game. It just didn't end up mattering, but yeah.
Sure. We talk about, we said we were going to group in special teams in just different spots. A lot of new faces, and you're hoping some of these guys, whether it's the experienced players you brought in I'm about to get to, provide those plays, or some of these other guys, as you build more depth in the DB room, show up in the special teams areas, whether it's just as an effective gunner, whether it's going down, returning the punts, whatever it might be. Bringing Keenan Nelson from Ohio State pretty late on. He's a safety. Deuce Lee and Trey Mittman from Monmouth and NC-A&T, Week 1 opponent, fiddly enough, also in that safety mix. Donovan Faria, seemed like it's like a safety, cornerback kind of tweener, which again might fit kind of what they're working with the 4-2-5, 3-3-5 stuff.
Big nickel.
Darius.
That's what we're calling those now. Big nickels.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know where I found that, but I like that because that really does describe what they are. Because they're not, usually anyway, they're not fast enough to just play corner. But they're also a little bit they're too small to play linebacker. But they're also a little too big to be safeties. So throw them in the nickel and see what happens. Big nickels.
Well, and certainly if you were going down a linebacker, if you're running some more 4-2-5, having some heft to the guy who's replacing a guy who might have 40 pounds on him, at least he won't be like 5 inches shorter than the linebacker you had on the field. So as we're talking about the run game the run defense needing to be better, that's a factor where you hope that can make a difference is maybe the personnel packages you're using. But more of the corners they bring in, Darius Johnson Jr. from Gardner-Webb and Toby Bolton from Tennessee Tech, who both made plays in the spring game, kind of the guys that I've singled out that I could speak to from what I've seen as they were making plays. They looked like ball hawking safeties, ball hawking corners. Kind of the line I keep trotting out with this is like, I don't think the talent was the issue in the secondary last year. They weren't set up to succeed, and we look at all the places that I just said that these are where guys are now. It's like, it can't be that it was not a talented enough room because of all these power conference programs and other, like Liberty is a well thought of group of 6 program. If you had players that were able to get on those rosters and that wasn't enough, then you're never going to have enough at this level. So it can't be about the players you lost. And I think it is another area where, if everything's simplified, you are hoping that you're going to have less coverage busts and you're not going to be giving up big plays down the field. And you just need interceptions. Hardly got any last year. And so, once again, talking about you maybe want some more TFLs from up front, front 7. Someone's got to be a playmaker here and emerge and start making plays on the ball more. Because, I honestly think, speaking to there was some talent last year, it wasn't even so much that the secondary wasn't making plays. It was just when you're not forcing turnovers, you get 3 INTs as a defense. It extends the amount of plays you're going to be out there on a drive. And while it ended up being the case that they're facing nearly 498 rushing attempts as a defense, and it was only 340 passes they were defending, you're giving up 64% completion percentage. Like, I don't know, they're just not making the job easier on yourself when you're not getting off the field, forcing turnovers, and the third down percentage, not as bad as it could have been. Never mind. As bad as it could have been. It was 47%. I was about to say,
I'm pretty sure it's like near 50.
Yeah, 47.2%. Yeah, so that's another big part of the puzzle, just getting off the field. Kind of a holistic all-11 approach there, needing to be better in all phases. And so we just listed off a bunch of players who we haven't seen play in a Georgia State uniform, or it's kind of like, I hope it's better, but that's kind of where it's at. And maybe we've pointed out a couple of areas where the new ideas that this new staff is bringing in will help, but the proof is going to be in the next 12 games and what it looks like when they go out there and play other teams.
Georgia State forced 6 turnovers last year. 3 picks and 3 fumbles. And I still don't know how they managed to get 2 interceptions against Ole Miss and then not a single other interception until their last game against Old Dominion. Like, that is just something that does not... You could run a million simulations of football and you might see that in one of them. Like, that is just an insane thing to have happen. Because in doing this and in thinking... Whenever, the transfer portal closed, it really made me annoyed that the defense that gave up 37.8 points a game had all of these players go to Power 4 schools. And when I say, it made me annoyed, it's clear either these coaches are lying, they could be, but either these coaches are lying to these players, and that's how they got them to go to these schools, or there was something else about last year that caused the defense to look as bad as it did and to play as bad as it did. Because I feel like with every other number that we uncover, there's something else about this defense that's like, man, this was a historically horrible defense. Legitimately, you have to question if they were trying, not in an effort sense, just in a, I like who I'm playing with and I feel good. I'm an 24-year-old or whatever, and today I want to go ball out. Sometimes you just don't feel great. Like, that's fine. But it's like, how on earth did you allow 47% of the third downs you faced to convert? How? Like, legitimately, were you trying to stop the other team? Was it all just, 3rd and 1s and Derrick Henry, dropped down from the NFL and decided to go beat up on some college kids? Like, what? The biggest part about the 2026 defense for Georgia State is you just have to fix stuff like that. You can't allow a 47% third down percentage. You can't allow a 60% fourth down percentage. Everybody goes for fourth downs now. That number has to be better. You cannot allow 37 points per game. And the improvements that we're talking about, shave 5% off the third down rate. Shave a touchdown off of the points per game rate. And we've got something that we can work with. That's a malleable defense that we can try some things. But, like, it was just so bad last year that it's like, how can you look at this defense now and, one, not recognize that basically everybody had to go, and two, there's just so much room for growth because it really was that bad. But what does that growth look like with who is specifically here? That's an important question.
Yeah, and I think cosmetically, the points per game will almost certainly be improved by the fact that you are not playing both Ole Miss and Vanderbilt. If you take one of those games out and replace it with, I guess in this case, another G5, if you want, NIU is who you're replacing. A hypothetical 2025 matchup against NIU, who went 3-9, you're probably not giving up north of 60 points, probably. And so the numbers would have looked better if you have that type of non-conference. And so that's why I say cosmetically, because that could be the only thing that shifts, and that could make them 4 points better. And that would still have them among the worst defenses in the league and not that much better. So there's no Cam Brown 12 games button you can press here where it's like a reason to think that they can shave something like, what did you say, 6 points? You go in reverse what we said with the offense, 6 points off, 7 points off. If you're getting into that point where it's like you're giving up maybe 31 a game and the offense is giving up 26 a game, or scoring 26 a game, excuse me. That could be in the place where you are certainly fighting for a bowl game, and even in that point, you still need to be forcing more than 6 turnovers. In that point, you need to be a team that is comfortably plus in the turnover category to swing some of these games and to still make up for the fact that you're not one of the better defenses in the league. And so it would be completely irresponsible to sit on here and be like, okay, but what if they suddenly gave up 18 points a game and were the best in the conference? Just cutting your points per game in half in 1 year, I can't imagine that's ever happened. So, like,
did Ryan Day just decide that he wanted to just moonlight in Atlanta for some reason? Like that would be that's the only the way I can see something like that happening.
Right, and so it's like it's hard to you can get caught up in the numbers of it all, and it's like, sure, if they get to this number or whatever, like, and if they get to this number on the offense, like, it all boils down to they just got to be better situationally. And it's like, if you can be a good third down defense, even if some of these issues still linger, even if you're not great against the run, or even if you're not great at forcing turnovers, but just better than you were last year, there's a way that a team can just be you can drill down on the fundamentals and just in those third down situations, if all you do is you are in the top half of the league in third down defense, that alone could be the difference in a few games. And if you're making that the non-con is lighter, you can maybe win 2 or 3 of the non-con and things break your way, versus that being a rank impossibility last year when you had 2 SEC teams on the schedule. You bake that in with a couple of games flipped because you were just better situationally on both sides of the ball. That is how you can get yourself into this is a team fighting for a bowl game versus this is a team mired at 1-11. And the truth of it is, none of that could happen. And it could be a team that is still just not good at the finer points of the game, still giving up a lot of big explosives, and still not getting off the field as a defense on third down. And that would be just more of the same, and we would be having the conversation when the offseason comes around, or maybe not even that long. So I think that when you look at how it has gone, it's so easy to get caught up, and we have done it on this pod. We like in the run up to this conversation we're kind of ending with, and we have done it with like these are the numbers they need to switch. But like the bottom line is just like it's just got to be fundamentally sounder to give yourself a chance, and whatever that manifests in, whatever it is, it's like you can't put your finger on what this team has to do. I saw Scott Watkins, friend of the pod, former Panther Talk extraordinaire, as I called him, one of our strongest Sunbelt soldiers, did the helmet schedule thing for every team in the Sunbelt. And for Georgia State, I think he had what I would say is a fairly optimistic prediction. He had them going 4-8, which he had them going 3 wins in non-con because he had them going 1-7 in league play. And it was almost a perfect summation of just the difficulty in evaluating this year and what is going to be good enough. Because in that case, it would be a 3-win improvement on the 2025 season. It would be the best season that the team has had under Dell McGee, and yet that would leave them 2-22 in league play in 3 seasons, and only 8-32 overall in 4 seasons or 3 seasons. Even if they have a bowl season, the overall record's not even going to look that good. But it's just, this is the battle you're up against, and we haven't really seen it at all. And so I don't come away with this. I would be surprised if people are coming away with this thinking like, oh, everything's fixed and there's a reason to totally believe. I think it's just going to be if it all comes together. And we haven't seen it so far. Doesn't mean it can't happen. Happens every year in the sport, but when you're saying in year 3 they just need to be better at the fundamentals of the game, that's really not a great sign.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to sit and have the conversation, because I mean, if you think about the basketball season, like it's not fun to go into the season with the all right, when are we going to start the conversation?
We were so like, I won't say lenient, but like we were giving so much latitude.
Yes.
And then the first game of the year happened at EMU, and it's like, okay, nothing changed. We're
not even a little bit.
The South Dakota State game happened, and it was like, oh, this could get just embarrassingly bad.
They figured it out
and then,
to get average, and then it, completely crapped out at the end there. But like, those are not like in college sports. You don't have rebuilds. This isn't like the NFL or professional sports where, like, yeah, you can sense, a direction that's like, even take a team like the Jets or the Dolphins. Like, yeah, we kind of laugh at them, but like, I know exactly what both of those two teams, at least I think with the Jets, I feel like I know exactly what both of those two teams are doing and the direction that they're going in. But you don't get an NFL draft every single week for them to be able to do things. So you're going to have
Georgia
a year
State
like this year.
Tank for Arch.
Exactly. There's not a high schooler that Georgia State is tanking for. You know what I mean? There might be a high schooler in Georgia who's like, all right, I can go fix that team, but that's not the same thing. That's completely on the kid. So I think as we talked about last week, I think that you could find something watchable on this Georgia State team. I'm not sure it's going to be the defense, but I would love for us to be wrong based on the schedule and just them just playing better than last year.
And kind of the reverse case of like, would think the offense could be exciting. It is fun if it's like a defense that's forcing a bunch of turnovers and like that's what they do, and they're still giving up a bunch of chunk plays and like it's still there's issues there, but it's like the inverse is you get a pick 6 in the game and just like that's how they manage, and they're in a bunch of shootouts. Like you could at least have fun there, and I think that the direction of what they're trying to do, I see it clearer than I had the first 2 years on defense. And that what they have said lines up with what they have done in putting the roster together. So that's the thing I can say for the defense. Is kind of what I led with, so I don't have any greater kind of takeaways than before going through all of the Jimmies and the Joes of it all. But as we're saying, they're going simplified. They're going to try and confuse teams more with the looks than what they're actually doing play to play. If you're going to do that, you have two co-coordinators who work together, another guy on staff who works with the secondary, who also worked with the DC before, and you brought in a lot of guys who have done it at lower levels, who are experienced, and so you can tell them, go out and do this thing. and there's a greater likelihood that they can go out there and do a simple scheme that you're not asking them to do too much, and you're relying more on execution than you are on dialing up anything super special. That all kind of tracks together. It's just we can't say with any certainty at this point what that'll look like as far as what it looks like on a game-to-game basis for this defense. And that's just the reality of it. We're all going to find out together. I hadn't been able to get down, see practice, talk during camp as much as maybe I'd hoped for, and certainly as I had in the last couple of years. But I honestly don't think that my opinion would be that different than if it had been like last year, where I was able to go down a few times and talk and see whatever parts of practice media was allowed at. I really don't think it would be that different, because it's kind of like, all right, what does it look like on the Saturdays?
Yeah, the same way with, like, it's really hard to judge how running games are doing. When you've got just camp, it's like they're not hitting as hard as they're going to be. There's a difference between, like, hey man, I got to have these 3 yards, or I've got to prevent you from these 3 yards, and that's my guy, Ryan. Like, I'm not going to hit him too hard right now. Maybe bust him up a little bit, but not anything crazy.
So I start spreading the news. I'm going to New York on a vacation this week, but it will not affect recording schedule. I will be back on Wednesday in time for next week, which will be a bit of a kind of not that much of a time between when the pod is going to be out and the game's happening on Friday, but just kind of how it lines up, and just building that anticipation, as it were, for Georgia State's home opener against North Carolina A&T is next Friday night. We will have the preview on that next episode. Did want to leave with something. I don't know if you caught this, because you're not so much on the Twitters these days, which is where I caught it, but it's just a funny thing where kind of the synchronicity of a fan base and the stuff you don't know, that these coaching staffs are always going through the same thing you are. But Jesse Minter did an interview. I saw this from Jamison Hensley, who is the ESPN Ravens reporter. Obviously, Jesse Minter is now the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, and he was talking about, he had gotten asked in the interview about like toughest football game he had been a part of, or like the game that sticks out to him in the memory. He gave this quote. He mentioned Georgia State's 69-31 loss to Georgia Southern in the 2014 season, giving up 613 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, as a game that still bothers him over a decade later, calling it his major come-to-Jesus moment. And P.J. Volker, who was the Linebackers coach, who's now on staff with him at the Ravens, also gave quotes in this article, said, "We went into the lab in the offseason, and I'll never forget, he circled the date on the calendar for when they were going to play Georgia Southern next. It was December 5th, and we were going to have the guys ready to play, and we were. It's a focal point of the offseason. The next season," the article goes on to say, "Minter enjoyed one of his most satisfying wins as Georgia State defeated Georgia Southern 34-7. Minter's defense held Georgia Southern to a season-low 203 yards of total offense. Georgia Southern coach Willie Fritz acknowledged after the game that he was, quote, out-coached. That's a day I'll never forget," Minter said. So I just saw it pop in my feed earlier today as we're getting ready for this podcast. And obviously, we're going to talk about the defense, so it almost flows in together. But just, I put it myself as I put the kind of the screenshot on Twitter with linking to the article of like, Georgia State fans, if you were scarred by that day in 2014, don't worry. Jesse Minter also was.
Yeah, it's funny because all these years later, I didn't even realize that Minter was Georgia State's DC until I think we started doing the podcast, like back in like 2019, 2020 era. And so the fact that he feels about that 2-game stretch against Georgia Southern as like we do, I like Jesse Minter, man. Don't come for me, Ravens, but I like Jesse Minter.
Yeah, I guess the Pats fans, if he wants a head coach, is still circling. If Minter does well in Baltimore, he's going to want to. The issue there is that head coaches leaving for head coaching jobs in the NFL is so exceedingly rare.
Yeah, that one would be a little tricky.
I think the ship has sailed by this point for you getting Jesse Minter until things go really well or not well in Baltimore. But just a funny note to end on there with just, frankly, shouting out the State-Southern rivalry on such a grand scale on an ESPN feature piece like that, and just the ultimate collective experience that this sport can be sometimes. It's like, if you were there in 2014, you certainly felt a lot of the same things that Jesse Minter did, and you can see in print now on ESPN that he certainly felt the same way and kind of manifested what happened the next year with the 34-7 win as it happened. But we will be back next week. Game preview. Season gets underway. Talking season officially comes to an end. Thank you for listening to this episode and last week as we have gone through the offense and the defense, getting ready as the Panthers are almost set for year 3 of the Del McGee era. We will catch you next time.